Hello, welcome along to Sport and Life in association with Bang & Olufsen of Cheltenham and Serene AV, who pride themselves on world-class customer care and home installations. And we also come to you with Cytoplan's food-based supplements that I've been taking for 25 plus years, and you get 30% off with the podcast, your first purchase at cytoplan.co.uk, 10% ongoing with the discount code Draper10X, my last name, all capital letters, then the numbers 10 and the capital letter X. Okay, on with the show. Lorien Holiday, the aptly named holiday in the midst of the summer sun. How are you?
Hey, Teddy. I'm good, thank you. Yes, holiday is about to go on holiday, actually. I'm off to Wells next week for a few days. So we're going to the cathedral city back there. So yeah, no, we're doing all right. Surviving the heat. The heat.
I know, it's funny you say, because I was saying how much I enjoy the heat, but we were talking about not only I lived abroad in a warm climate in the Caribbean when I was growing up, but also being born in the summer. We've got a hypothesis for another podcast conversation in the future that the winter babies like the winter and summer babies like the summer.
Yeah, there's got to be some truth to that. There's got to be some truth. We'll do some research.
Well, that might be a very minor point of the fostering process, which what we want to talk about, which I was intrigued when you messaged me, because I had a little bit of fostering experience in the sense that my mother worked for a long time as a fostering adoption social worker, and my sister-in-law has fostered over the past couple of years. But I was really surprised to learn that you have been fostering for 3 years. Not that I'm surprised, it's like an insult. I mean, not that I didn't think you were up to it or anything like that, but it was just something that hadn't come up in conversation. But tell us how long you've been doing it for. Set the scene for us in terms of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So fostering is something that we've sort of grown into. It's something that I sort of mulled over many decades ago now, really, probably 20 years ago. I kind of had this notion that there was lots of children out there who desperately needed good homes, and that fostering would be a good thing to do. And I couldn't honestly tell you what sort of sowed that seed in my head. But like most things when you're younger, I did absolutely nothing about it for a long period of time. And it was probably 10 years ago. I was just wrapping up my previous employment line in financial services. And I was out in Bournemouth, and there was a stand for BCP, the local council, Bournemouth Christchurch Pool, were advertising for people to mentor young care leavers. So these were people who were 16 plus, who were either had left or were about to leave the fostering and were looking for, in quotes, responsible adults to help them out and sort of provide mentoring support. And that really kind of appealed to me. And so that was my first sort of step into that sort of world. So did some training on that with the council and met a number of young care leavers over the ensuing years. And one of them I'm still working with. She's now 27. Fascinating young lady. And that then led, I suppose, ultimately to us thinking more seriously, me and my wife, obviously having to do this in partnership. And
not just introduce someone to the house, surprise. Yeah.
That's right, surprise. I want to foster. How do you feel about that? So we negotiated it for a while, and we just thought, well, let's contact a company and see what happens. So we started the process, and it's a long process, and for good reason, but it is very frustrating when you're trying to do something you think is good and right, and you're getting, grilled and subject to all these tests and assessments and things like that. But so we went through the assessment process, and that was probably a little bit over 3 years ago now.
And they speak to your friends and family, don't they, as part of that? Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So what they look for is they kind of want you to have a support network of your own. So the idea is, because it's easy to think that you're just taking on a child or even a couple of children, but you're buying into sort of their ecosystem. You're often you're often in contact with their families in some way or another. So the foster child we now have living with us has 4 brothers and sisters that they have regular contact with. They all live in separate locations. So there's a sort of logistic challenge, and there are family members that are still very much engaged, and there are family members that we have less contact with, but are still part of the thing. So you're sort of buying into, to an extent, someone else's ecosystem, but equally, as you say, the council, the fostering agencies want you to have your own support network, just like in an ideal world with your own children and your own family. You'd be able to send your kids to grandparents or whatever to give you some
Mm.
breathing space for a few days, or whatnot. So yes, there is, they want you to have at least a few people, and it doesn't have to be family, friends, family, that you can sort of rely on if you need an emergency babysitter, child sitter, things like that. So yeah, there's a lot to think about purely from a logistics level, and I think that can often put people off. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
it's like one of the problems I think my wife and I had is we overthought the whole having our own kids thing, and thought about the sort of the complexities and logistics and all these sort of ridiculous things, really. But there are things that you just get on with, I guess,
Mm.
as a parent. But you are, as a foster parent, you're sort of landed in this sort of ready-made world of
Yeah.
a young person.
Yeah, it's interesting. You always feel like you're on a roller coaster. I've got a daughter, and actually, you go from the sort of shock of a baby, and then but there's always challenges at different landmarks as you go through it. But to have, you're diving into the FA Cup final in the 28th minute or something, and suddenly trying to get up to pace without a warm up or anything like that, without knowing who you're playing with and who you're playing against. It's a kind of a
Yeah,
complicated picture, and it's interesting you touched upon that, because that's parallels with my sister-in-law in terms of the little boy in particular that she fostered had a bigger, wider family, I think 8 or 9 siblings. And maybe that's a relatively typical case of biological parents being struggling in those contexts. And it's a challenge, isn't it? Because this question of what is best for the child, particularly when you're new to being the carer, sometimes it feels like those reunions with brothers, sisters, mums, dads can be quite traumatic, but actually overall, that in the future they'll want to have had that opportunity. So there's a lot of emotional decisions that go into it.
yeah, and that's a really complicated point because, and I think it sort of changes, and I say with fashion, but with sort of what studies and research become more popular and more, and I do say fashion, but I think fashionable is probably a correct word for it, unfortunately, because yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of the young children want to have contact with their families, and they genuinely do, but equally, a lot of young children don't want to have it. And even, young children who sometimes think that they want the contact, it does destabilize them. It creates real emotional turmoil for them. So it's a very complicated question. And I mean, it's not a question that the foster carers fortunately have to own, right? So it's social services and the young person. So if once the young person is of sufficient age, and that's typically in their teenage years, then they are deemed that they can have more agency. They give more direction in terms of what they actually want. So they can make the decision whether or not they want to continue contact, as it's known, with their family. And sometimes they want that and sometimes they don't. But it's very destabilizing for these young people. And whether they're having contact or not having contact, it creates its own unique sort of set of problems and challenges.
It's interesting you said at the start about your entry into it was the mentor for 16-year-olds who've been through the fostering system. That's what I've always wrestled with or seen a distinction with the fostering and adoption. With adoption, you feel like there is then a lifelong commitment, as there would be. My mum and dad would still help me even in the early 70s if they were in trouble. Is that how do fostering people approach that? Because there's a financial supplement to support your fostering, which will end at a certain point when that young person becomes an adult, I guess, in theory. But that's a big decision, is it then? Do you ethically, morally, emotionally feel connected to that person to then play the part of, the older mother and father? That's a big thing, isn't it? Because we all need support once we're 18.
Yeah.
That doesn't just end.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's the crazy thing, isn't it? And I naively sort of, left home at sort of 19. I ended up going back, but I left home at 19 and thought, I can make my way in the world and I don't need any support. It'll be fine. Crashed and burned. And so, yeah, it's very, and I had support there technically, but I just in my own pride and arrogance, I didn't want it. But these young people obviously don't have that opportunity at all. And it does cause its own challenges. And that's where the mentoring sort of support program was supposed to help. But again, that depends on the relationship. So and it depends on the child in care as well. So some children in care maintain very healthy relationships with their foster carers and continue to, have them as sort of pseudo family and support. And again, the young lady that I continue to mentor, she has an ongoing relationship with her foster family, even though she hasn't lived with them for almost a decade now. So she
That's lovely.
continues to stay in touch, and they support her with childcare from time to time, and all sorts, and emotional support and things like that. So again, it depends, on the relationship and what and what your attitude is as a foster carer as well, because people come into foster caring for all sorts of reasons. You've got idealists out there and naive idealists like me and my wife who think we can just make everything better for people. And you've got people who obviously who do it as a commercial thing, right? So primarily as a commercial thing. And yes, you get an allowance for doing the fostering. But there's lots of motivations for it. And I guess, depending on your motivation and your attitude to the experience of fostering will impact how you would like that relationship to continue. I mean, the foster we've supported, so we started, and I think this is something I'm keen to sort of invite people to consider if they're thinking about fostering but think it sounds too terrifying, is we started with something called respite fostering. And we did that for sort of 2 years before we took a permanent placement. So respite fostering, for anyone who's not familiar with the term, is where you provide temporary support for a child who's already in care. So a child who's already with a family, typically they're already with a family, and you are essentially providing short-term cover, a day, a weekend, a week, whatever, while they go on holiday or whilst they have perhaps an emergency appointment and they don't have anyone else to support them. So it's your opportunity to meet these young people and get, exposed to it with minimum obligation really for yourself, right? It doesn't require you to upend your life. It doesn't require you to move someone in permanently, introduce them to your family, all those sort of complicated things. And it gives you the opportunity to get comfortable with it yourself, because I think a lot of people do go in very sort of wholeheartedly and with the best of intentions, and they can get very quickly overwhelmed. And this is why I think one of the reasons why I think the foster care system has such a high attrition rate, particularly I think with new foster carers. They kind of go in, they're very optimistic. They want to change the world. They want to make a difference, all these really good things, all these really important things. And then they're sort of hit with the reality of it, particularly if you've got a young person for the first time, whether you've had your own children or not. These kids do bring a different experience, because you haven't had them integrate with your life since birth. You haven't had any period of adjustment. You suddenly got this, fully formed person. I say fully formed at whatever age they are, with their own unique challenges and personalities and experiences, compounded by their experiences in care and compounded by potential trauma in life. And that can be difficult. So I think respite gives you a far more gentle entry point, so you can sort of find your feet. You're providing great help to established foster families who just need a bit of a break from time to time, which is totally understandable. We all, I think a lot of biological parents would quite like a break from their kids from time to time.
Well, we've had one. My daughter's been on a residential, actually. It's quite surreal. You keep panicking about where is she? What's she doing? But you realise she's actually at school. So there's a kind of slightly subconscious anxiety that comes with it. But it is also very, very relaxing in one way as well, which has been nice. And being able to stay up a little bit later, etc. Yeah, it's a complex picture, isn't it? And I'm aware that and I mentioned this before we started recording, your title on your emails is personal growth coach. You and I think, have germinated from an interest in physical development and personal training, and moved into sort of a sense of wanting to evolve emotionally, psychologically. That idea that not that we're broken, but we want to evolve in life and make slight improvements. And that concept, how big has this been for your development as a person? The challenges that's come with it, and the sort of sense of having to grow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's been brilliant. I mean, it's been, it really holds a mirror up to you, because you've got your established life, your established mode of being, that the habits that you are unaware are your life, how you like to spend your evenings, what you like to do in the day. And all of a sudden you've got this new person that, you need to accommodate and has got, needs and wants and desires of their own and wants to do things. And and wants to integrate with some of the stuff that you do and wants to resist some of the stuff that you do. And so really sort of recognizing that friction that you feel in yourself because your sort of stable world has been sort of disrupted in a sense. And this applies to all sorts of things in our life. I think one of the interesting things about this is, although this is through the lens of fostering, it's no different to any other sort of significant change in your life, be it a change of job or a change in your health status or whatever. There's these shifts to these foundational elements of our life, the stability, the perceived stability of our life. And to bring something in to sort of rock that boat a little bit is really interesting. So I think, one of the key things has been watching where sort of my own temper is still quite, I say fragile. I consider myself to be a fairly calm and well-balanced person. I teach mindfulness. I hope I'm fairly calm and well-balanced.
But this is where the challenge comes, isn't it? When you think of good old Buddha sat under a tree or whatever, it's like that's fine. But then if a foster child's throwing something at you or not even engaging you or whatever it might be, then that is a test of Zen or ability to keep your composure. It's being in the heart of the action, isn't it? It's not playing with a football on your own. It's being in the match.
Totally. And I've always said, if mindfulness has to work in the pressured situations or it doesn't work at all, so, and so it's been a really interesting sort of test of that and being able to sort of observe my own patterns of thought and behavior and the sort of the frustrations and the resistances to things and watching the dynamic with my wife and the foster child as well and all that sort of stuff play out and watching because they've got some very similar personality traits and it causes a bit of conflict and it's really interesting as an outsider and then trying to sort of mediate that skillfully when it's appropriate to sort of point out out the similarities.
It's a big thing, like the root of it is kindness and you're giving kindness and you, in a sense, we all selfishly want some sort of gratitude in response, but I presume in fostering, that gratitude may be delayed. I mean, I'm thinking of sports as well. I know people like Dele Alli, whose career has sort of, unfortunately, kind of ebbed away a little bit in professional football, but a scintillating talent played for England. And he was very, very appreciative of the foster care he had. There are other footballers I know have spoken about coming through foster care and their foster parents still being with them. But often that's not going to come from the turbulent 13-year-old, is it? It's going to come from the 25-year-old down the line. So you have to, you're not in this, the kindness in itself has to be something you enjoy giving without necessarily a return on it in the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's playing the long game, and you do hear an awful lot of stories, and this is part of the sort of onboarding process for foster carers, hopefully, is that you get these sort of, lovely stories of kids who were perhaps quite difficult. And they recognize that when, because their brains aren't fully formed, the prefrontal cortex, the thing that affects all young people, their ability to make rational decisions, coupled with the destabilizing fact of them having been in care and likely to have been in multiple homes and all these sorts of things creates real problems for their ability to create healthy attachments and feel stable. And when they do start to feel attached to you, and oftentimes they'll push away from that sometimes because they're scared that they'll get taken away again. And again, this is no different to people who've, had their hearts broken too many times in relationships. If you've had too many failed relationships, you kind of, it's very tempting to sort of lock down and think, well, I'd rather not have a relationship than risk getting hurt again. And that's no different to the behavior of the young people sometimes. But again, it depends on our ability to recognize what they need and how they're presenting. And I think that's so important as well from the psychological perspective. I think whilst there are loads of training courses that are provided for people on the fostering thing, really tons and tons of training, free training, but it's getting that it's having the time to do that training and having that training when you need it, in a sense, because when you on board, you get very, relatively speaking, you have very little training with the best will in the world, just because, they need to get you up and running with a young person. And also they can't, there is a selection process in terms of, they would try and match people's, a young person's needs to a particular carer's profile. But because of the supply and demand problem, beggars can't be choosers, and they're often, having to place children as best they can. And so you might be a relatively inexperienced foster carer, potentially with a child with more complicated needs, with potentially, minimal training at that point. So, getting your head around core psychological concepts like sort of attachment theory, and which there's tons of stuff on YouTube. It's, there's loads of things out there, really nice bite-sized things. And having their sort of openness to recognize these things as well, particularly in an emotional moment. And this is where skills like mindfulness can help, or having a very calm temperament if you're naturally that way.
Well, a distance between the stimulus, which could be, we had a lad round doing it, and he cracked me up. I was trying to play tennis with him, and he just started to smash balls over the next door neighbour's garden. It was and I just cracked up because it was very similar to what I was like as a boy, and I just saw the funny side of it, and then went to try and find the balls afterwards. But you have to not respond to those sort of triggers, do you? And sort of like expect to be able to control the environment, I think is a big one for these guys. Yeah. And, you take the attachment theory, but of course it'd be hard to attach, wouldn't it? Because it must be so terrifying to not have that mum and dad around, that stayed with you for whatever reason, you haven't got that bedrock.
Yeah, and some of these kids have come from, very difficult domestic circumstances. And so a lot of times they are preparing themselves to be put in, even though they know they're in the foster system, they are subconsciously, every time they meet someone new, they are worried that that the abuse may continue, right? So it can, and that takes. I mean, one of the children that we had stay with us, it took them 3 days to sort of, I say, not though crying there solidly for 3 days, but to realise that we weren't going to, hurt them when they started to unfold. They were very, very nervous, very tearful, very stressed. Bless them, and it's kind of giving them sort of closeness but distance at the same time, because you can't smother them. You've got to sort of let them settle into a space where they can feel safe and sort of unfurl from when they realise that things are not where it is. But they're sort of put into these subconscious places and patterns, and that's when they're smashing tennis balls into the neighbour's fence or whatever, there are potentially these things playing out. The anger and the frustration about them being in a strange place and not being where they think they want to be or who they want to be with, or the uncertainty about who they're with, and all that sort of stuff can cause all sorts of interesting things. But I think it's there's often a lot of horror stories around fostering and the foster system. And I think another thing, to a point, rightly so, they do try their best to put you off. and genuinely, our personal experiences, we've had virtually no trouble with the young people. The challenges that we've had have been primarily around the system and the frustration with the system. The young people that we've had, and obviously accepted that most of them were on respite, so we only had them for relatively short periods, but we saw some of them for sort of like a year, over periods of time in that year. So we built some fairly strong relationships with some of these young people. But behaviourally, we had very little issue in terms of serious behavioural problems, or no serious behavioural problems, at all. So,
and I always think about Tony Robbins saying as well that with the little lad, and he's a beautiful little boy, but he's got a little bit of a fire to him, which I can empathise with. And I remember Tony Robbins saying that anger is something you can work with, whereas sadness sometimes isn't. So these kids that have got that fire and fight, I think will, in a sense, fair play to them for having that. We should outline the importance for people maybe who are in a position to consider it. And I think it's particularly complex. Like, we were asked about it because of my sister-in-law's involvement, but having a daughter, for us, we didn't want to impact her situation, that, impart any damage. That was a big consideration for us. But there is a need for it, isn't there? Because you said the numbers are going in the wrong direction in terms of the kids requiring fostering and the amount of people being prepared to foster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the numbers since 2000, the numbers of kids in care has gone up by 40%, which is pretty massive. And I think it's somewhere around the 80,000 mark, children in care at the moment in England. The population in that period, just to put it in context, has grown by 20%. So we've got a chunk more people. We've got about 10 million more people in the country, so that factors some of it. But there are a lot more people in care. And yes, as you say, the number of foster carers has actually dropped somewhat. So, and this is I mean, the reasons are probably multivaried and complex, but part of the problem is the frustration of the system. I think again, you're sharing your world with social services, so you've got and they're broadly very lovely people. Again, they're trying to do the right thing as well, right? They just want to they want this to work and all that sort of stuff. But you're part of this much bigger system, and I think another key factor is the logistics of having a spare room and potentially having children at home still, and particularly older children because you can't afford to leave the home if they wanted to. Housing's more expensive. Job markets are more uncertain. All those sorts of things. So having you've got to make the decision whether everyone in the family is happy with this decision and to look to integrate this person, or you have to wait till your kids have left home, whenever that may be, and then want to take another child on at that point. You might want to break first, maybe. But I do think it's sort of the empty nesters. I speak to a lot of people who have young adult children or adult children now who've left, and they do kind of sort of feel a bit lost. And I think fostering, even like I say, even if it's respite to start with, can really give you some value and some connection. And you might find, as we did, we found a child that we really connected with, that we wanted to invite into our home, or needed a home, and therefore we invited them into the home because we'd built that relationship, and we felt that we could really offer this young person something important, and that we were a good match. So that was fortunate, but that came about through the respite process, because we got to encounter various children who were already in placements.
It's like about working your way up training, isn't it? Kind of
it is. It's not jumping in too fast, and some people are completely committed, and they'll be completely clear about what they want to do, and do what you want to do. But I would just, if people are, because again, I think there's a terrifying statistic. I think that something, and I think this was a Bernardo study, something in the region of 70% of adults surveyed by Bernardo's, maybe even higher than that, maybe it's nearly 80%, were concerned about the lack of foster support for young people, but only 7% said that they would consider doing it. So,
that in the garden looks really overgrown, but I'm not going to mow it.
And this is the human problem, isn't it? We're all good at pointing out problems, and we want someone else to fix them for us. We're really good at that. So, but I think the respite really does give a sort of far gentler way of getting into the system and seeing how you feel, and meeting these young people and discovering that they're not scary, and that actually they just want stability and care, and someone to be there for them, and to help them stabilize and become the adults that they can be.
And don't be afraid of not being perfect in terms of what you can offer, because that's clearly impossible, but also a lot better, a whole lot better than nothing. It's funny, I'm always reminded, in obsession with sport and connecting it to life, I suppose, but of Vince Lombardi's quote, the great American football coach, who said, football doesn't create character, it exposes it. And I almost think that with fostering, it probably does to an example. It's probably both are true, that you said incrementally you will develop that. But you mentioned people in middle life. I suppose it's that balance, isn't it? Of having the experience of life, having experience of knowing yourself and your foibles, your weaknesses, where you can grow before you have, if I was 21 and fostering, it would be an absolute disaster. But you sort of realize, but there's a balance, but then have you still got the energy in the tank to give to these foster kids? So, but you were saying that middle age, I'm guessing like 40 to 55 is a sweet spot for a lot of people in terms of fostering.
That seems to be where it's sort of happening statistically. So yes, and I think it is around that. It's sort of having your own sort of mental stability, having the affordability to do it as well, in terms of the spare space, perhaps having established a home, and perhaps having a spare room that may or may not be required to be used as an office, of course, post-COVID. So it is very much that period. And I think, again, to the point that you raised, I think people do put too much pressure on themselves to be perfect. And I speak from personal experience. And one of the things that we were sort of umming and ahhing for so long about a lot of this, and even taking this placement we have now, even with the connection that we had with this young person, is the fear of getting it wrong and making things worse for them, because, and that's, the terrible tragedy of some of us is this sort of overthinking and
Yeah.
wanting to not make things worse for these poor young people.
I think that's part of popular psychology as well, isn't it? It's great you mentioned the attachment theory, and we can all look it up on the internet. But I think what that's done now is make parents and fostering parents and adoptive parents all terrified now that you go, oh my God, there's no, because you can go one end of the extreme. You can pressure your children to do well at school, or you could be laissez-faire and then they don't pass their exams, and then there's all these myriad of things we're all juggling all the time about the consequences. And I think psychology, whilst explaining some things that can help us, can make us feel a bit anxious about getting it wrong. But ultimately, you do have to do something and give it a go.
Yes. Feel it out for yourself. And yes, I think you're absolutely right. And we can absolutely paralyze ourselves with analysis and wanting to be perfect and do the right thing. And there's so many different, particularly the joy of science is there's so many conflicting attitudes, particularly in the social sciences, because it's a soft science. There's no hard physics data that you can do a calculation on and prove that yes, this is this is absolutely
They're going
right.
to be a wonderful adult if I do this.
It's all theory, right? It's theory backed up by various degrees of sort of evidence, but it's never black and white. And kids behave differently and respond to differently. And even like in attachment, you've got people who are more susceptible to attachment vulnerability and people who are less susceptible to attachment vulnerability. So yeah, there's no hard, fast rules. And yes, you're absolutely right. You can just overthink yourself into oblivion with these things. So yeah, you just got to, sort of put your feet in and see what happens.
Yeah, where should we put our feet in? Because that's a good way to round it up, I suppose, the conversation. Where should we start? People are interested, like you say, don't jump in the deep end, first of all, but there are ways of adopt six kids or whatever. But there are ways to sort of feel your way in. Is it social services is the best port of call?
Well, I would certainly recommend to start with that, yes, with your local authority. And people will have different views. Some people use private companies and they, prefer them, and some people prefer local authorities. We've been with both. We definitely preferred our local authority over a private company that we tried.
But also, again, profit-driven, the local companies, and not to be cynical of,
yes,
and that was turn around.
Yes, and that was one of the reasons that I felt uncomfortable with it, and I should have realised that before I went in the first place. But yes, it felt a little bit distasteful that people were making sizable sums of money off this process rather than, because there are other ways of doing things. You can do things, you can do not for profit. It's not about not making some salary and not making appropriate money for your, for the effort you're putting in and the value you're giving. But it does when it's a pure sort of for-profit company rather than a community investment company, for example. Then that always feels a little bit more distasteful when it's around people's issues for me. But I'm not an economist. But anyway, yeah. Local authorities. I'm going to say I got into it through mentoring, young care leaders. That sort of gave me the opportunity to meet these people and see how, they'd experienced the care system and got through. Local authority and consider respite. And they might not want to encourage you to do respite because they will desperately want permanent carers. But, look at that as a potential if you're looking for sort of a more gentle entry into it, and then to find your feet, get some experience, and to connect with these young people. And then, like I say, oftentimes they may need a home. The other thing to remember is you can get children of all sorts of ages, so you can direct. Some people like looking after very young children, babies and whatnot, and toddlers and junior school kids. My wife and I have always focused on teenagers. We never wanted to have to worry about the nappies or anything like that. Yeah. Well, again, but
depends what it is. Yeah, they're all got challenges.
They're actually again, I mean, there's a whole range out there. But the teens, they can take care of themselves to a point, and you can have very different conversations with them. And so, it depends what you want out of it and stuff. But the teens have been fine. Again, broadly speaking, they've been fine. And I would urge people not to be terrified.
I've got an image of you with a lad from The Blind Side, massive American football player in your spare room. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I thought that's a brilliant film. I love that film. It was absolutely fantastic.
That's powerful. Based on a real story as well, which is again powerful for people. And I think that thing of doing something is key, and not being cynical as well, because it's interesting. You hear tangentially of stuff about people like you mentioned, the commercial motivation, accepting you would think maybe not ideal number of kids at sometimes to foster and potentially combustible characters put together like boys of the same age or whatever. And actually you think, you know what, whatever their motivation, there's some good being done here that that wouldn't be being done otherwise. And the reason social services have put these people with these isn't to give them money, it's to give them, those kids, something that's better than nothing. I think fundamentally that's, and whether it's respite
Yes.
or whether it's full-time fostering or adoption or whatever it is, you are
Yeah.
contributing in a positive way and not feeling like you're not doing enough, you're doing something.
No, definitely. And to come back onto a point, I think I skipped. Actually, I ended up sidelining it. You asked about the sort of the people coming back later in life and with gratitude, and they do, and they remember even sometimes the really small acts of kindness or perceived kindness, and it'll be something that you didn't even realize at the time, and it really sort of sat with them and resonated with them. And when their prefrontal cortex is finally fully developed in their mid-20s, and they've got they really appreciate some of the stability that they had that was provided for by foster carers. So it is so important to recognise that and remember the long game.
Well, your prefrontal cortex sometimes for us is mid-40s, but we'll keep going on. Wait for mine to
You guys, yeah.
solidify. Yeah.
Mine's still working out, yeah.
Lorien, I really appreciate it. And quick word on where we can follow you and sign up to your newsletter, because you do talk about a raft of self-development things, including fostering as well.
Yeah, LorienHoliday.com, my website, is probably the best place to connect with me. I do have social media channels all hidden carefully under my name, Lorien Holiday, on Instagram.
There's not too many Lorien Holidays.
YouTube.
I mean, you must be one of the only people on LinkedIn who has, pretty much free reign to be found.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, if you start with Lorien, you won't go too far wrong.
Yeah, I had a guy on recently called Gareth Evans, and I was like, people aren't going to find Gareth Evans online. There's about 3 million Welsh people called Gareth Evans. But yeah, I know there's probably only 2 million Welsh people. It's probably an over exaggeration. Lorien, thank you very much. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Teddy.